Welcome back to Hot Air with me, Joshua Robert. Well, today's episode is another one where you read the headlines and you're like, are we serious right now? Like, are we actually okay? If you've been watching Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, in the words of Rachel Zoe, are you okay? Are we okay? And the answer is, fuck no, we are not okay. This is a hot air news roundup, but not the kind where we just skim through the stories and move on. No, no, no. We are going to break things down. We are connecting the dots. And we, of course, are saying the things that need to be said with all of the sass that I can fucking muster. And, let's try to make it funny because the world is basically ending. We're diving into three stories that, again, on the surface might seem very separate, but then when you really look at them, they all point to a bigger pattern. First, we are talking about how Tennessee has decided to designate June, yes, June, which is Pride Month, as Nuclear Family Month, and why that is not just random timing, why Pride Month exists in the first place, and why the idea of straight pride is already baked into society. Let's be fucking real here. Then we are getting into the so-called Charlie Kirk Act and what's happening on college campuses when students are facing discipline or even expulsion for protesting speakers, especially those with anti-LGBTQ plus views. We're breaking down what free speech actually means, who it's protecting, and who it's punishing. And finally, we're going to talk about policies tied to Donald Trump involving the placement of transgender women in men's prisons. Why that is not just a policy decision, but a safety issue, an ethical issue, and something that has very real consequences for very real people. So, yes, this episode is going to be informative. It's going to be opinionated. That probably comes as no shock. And it's going to be a little bit spicy. And hopefully, it gives you the context and clarity to actually understand what's going on beyond just a headline. And part of the reason I do these episodes is because I will skim past stuff, whether it's on Instagram or TikTok or X or Threads, whatever, all the things. And I see these stories, but I don't really see them being talked about elsewhere. And these are things that I think are so important for us as a community, whether you're an ally to the queer community or you're part of the queer community yourself. These are things that are important to know and be aware of because it's very easy for CNN or Fox or MSNBC or whoever the fuck runs news stories nowadays. It's easy to ignore all of this stuff. And I frankly don't hear a lot of people talking about it. So sometimes I'm like, why am I doing these news roundups? Is this my brand? Is this the hot air gig? But it is because it's about staying informed, knowing what the hell is going on, which is the same as staying informed, and ensuring that the queer community, you and I, are on top of what's actually going down because there's so much that's happening behind the scenes that it's very worrisome. And of course, before we get into it, make sure you are tapped in and follow me on Instagram and TikTok at _HotAirPod for more content, more breakdowns, more unfiltered takes. I'm going to be posting a hell of a lot more. The 100th episode is coming up. And from there, we are starting a whole new era of hot air. So stay tuned for that. Head over to my website, hotairwithjoshuarobert.com to shop my merch, submit your listener stories, buy yourself a cute little mug like this, and send in your topic suggestions. I mean, like this, if you're watching on YouTube, like this. If you're not, well, imagine there's a cute mug with the hot air brand on it. Okay. So buckle up, stick with me. Let's hit it. Part 1, Nuclear Family Month. Bitch, be serious. We're just going to get right into the craziness because I read this headline and I had to pause. I had to try to blink and reread it 500,000 times just to make sure I wasn't being fucking pranked here. Like, Ashton Kutcher, where are you at? The state of Tennessee has officially designated the month of June as Nuclear Family Month. June. Pride Month, people. They're taking it back. The straights are taking it back. Now, if that timing doesn't feel intentional to you, I don't know what to tell you. Because June, historically, globally, culturally, is Pride Month. It's when the queer community celebrates identity, visibility, history, resistance, and joy. And suddenly, out of nowhere, we're like, oh, great. We're also celebrating the nuclear family now. The nuclear family, my dears, it's fucking dead. Okay. What a coinky dink. What a coincidence. What a random, completely unrelated, definitely not politically motivated coincidence. And listen, I want to start this by saying, we've already started. I would like to say something very clear, okay? People love to twist this conversation. There is nothing inherently wrong with families. There is nothing wrong with people choosing to live in traditional, heterosexual, two-parent household, male, female. That is not the issue here, okay? The issue is the framing. The issue is the messaging. The issue is why this exists, why now, and what it really is trying to say without saying it outright. Because when you dig into this designation comes from a resolution introduced by conservative lawmakers in Tennessee, emphasizing the importance of what they define as the nuclear family, typically described as a married mother and father with children. And in statements around this, supporters framed it as promoting stability, values, and societal well-being. Like, my eyes could not roll any fucking harder, which again, on the surface, sure, whatever. Sounds fine if you're into that shit. It sounds neutral. It sounds like, okay, sure, families are important, but as always, context matters and timing matters. And well, history really fucking matters, because when you place this in the context of ongoing legislation targeting LGBTQ plus rights, like drag bans, restrictions on gender affirming care, limits on how queer identities can be discussed in schools, even, like, it stops feeling like a neutral celebration and it starts feeling like a statement. And certainly not a subtle statement, because what is being implied without always being explicitly said is that this version of the family is the ideal. It is the standard, it is the norm that should be centered and protected. And everything outside of that is, at best, secondary, I guess. At worst, it's a threat. And that's where we need to pause and go, okay, let's unpack this. Let's pull off the bow and the wrapping paper. Let's unpack this. Like, here's the reality that people either ignore or conveniently forget. Okay. I'm going to fucking say it. Every month is Nuclear Family Month. Okay. Clear as day. Okay. Every motherfucking day is straight fucking pride. She is heated today. Okay. Every institution, every system, every structure in this country, and honestly, much of the world, was built around heterosexual cisgender norms. Marriage laws built around straight couples. Tax benefits structured around traditional family units. Media representation dominated for decades by straight relationships. And religious and cultural narratives, duh, no shit there, centered on heterosexual unions. Like, the entire foundation of society has historically prioritized and normalized one specific way of living. Just one. So when people act like the nuclear family is somehow under attack, like, I'm like, from where? By whom? Because, like, last time I checked, y'all have been running the show since the dawn of fucking time, okay? And I say that with love. I do, but I also say it with accuracy because I'm not fucking wrong. Now, hmm, must remain calm. I really was going to try and relay this calmly. I was so chilled like 5 seconds ago. Let's talk about why Pride Month exists in the first place. Something I'll continue to go over until everyone on the planet gets it, okay? This is where people start to lose the plot, though. Like, Pride Month is not just a celebration, it's a commemoration, okay? It traces back to the Stonewall riots, a series of protests led largely by queer people of color, trans women, drag queens, marginalized individuals who were fighting against police brutality and systemic discrimination. This was not a parade originally. This wasn't corporate floats and rainbow merch. This was resistance, okay? And that resistance turned into a movement for visibility, rights, and recognition. That was what, 1969? Not that long ago in the grand scheme of life. Because for a very long time, queer people were not allowed to exist openly. They were criminalized, pathologized, erased, and excluded from the very institutions that were built to support and protect other people, straight white people. So Pride became a way to say, like, We're here, okay? We exist and we are not going anywhere. We have not, and we will not. And that is so important and it matters, right? Because even now, even today, queer individuals face higher rates of discrimination, violence, and mental health challenges. According to organizations like Human Rights Campaign and the Trevor Project, queer youth are significantly more likely to experience bullying, rejection, and suicidal ideation compared to their straight peers. Why? Because every day is straight pride, baby. So when people say, why do you need a whole month? I'm like, because history exists, because you have had decades and millennia, because context exists, like, because inequality still exists. It's a no motherfucking brainer. And because visibility still matters. Now let's bring this back to Tennessee for a second, because that's what we're talking about. This conversation around the nuclear family month did not just happen out of nowhere. It is part of a broader pattern. In recent years, Tennessee has passed or proposed multiple pieces of legislation affecting the queer community. Restrictions on drag performances, limitations on gender affirming care for minors, and policies that impact how queer identities are discussed in educational settings. So, when you see something like this, like the emphasis on the nuclear family, it's not just a random celebration that they just said, hey, why not? It is part of a narrative. And that narrative is about defining what is considered normal and acceptable and worthy of protection. And again, no one is saying you can't celebrate families. No one is saying you can't value stability or connection or parenting or commitment. Like, live your fucking dream. But when that celebration is positioned in a way that excludes or diminishes other forms of family, like chosen family, queer family, single parent households, even blended families, that's where it becomes a problem. And frankly, racist and homophobic and sexist. Like, because family is not one size fits all. Maybe for some of you down in Tennessee, it is, okay? But not for all of you. And for a lot of people in the queer community, chosen family is everything. It's the friends who become your support system when your biological family could not or would not. It's the people who show up for you, who affirm you, who create a sense of belonging that you might not have found elsewhere. That is family too. And it deserves to be recognized, valued, and celebrated, not sidelined. Now, let's bring in a quote that really captures this tension. Advocates have pointed out that policies and messaging like this can reinforce exclusion. One commentator summarized this in interviews around similar legislation. They said, when the government elevates one type of family above others, it sends a message about whose lives are valued and whose are not. End quote. And that's the core issue here. It's not about the existence of the nuclear family. It's about the elevation of it as the ideal, especially in a context where other identities are already marginalized. And pride is not necessarily about family and children and finding your significant other. It is a celebration of just being allowed to exist and having equal rights and standing up for yourself and being included in society. What this nuclear family month is doing is saying only straight people can be married, only straight people can have children, only a man and a woman who are cisgender can have a union. It's the opposite of what Pride Month is. And let's talk about the bigger picture, because this isn't just about one state or one resolution. This is about a cultural conversation, a conversation about who gets to define what normal is, who gets to define family, who gets to define what is worthy of celebration. And if you zoom out, you start to see a pattern of attempts to reinforce, I fucking hate the word traditional, but traditional structures while simultaneously restricting or limiting the visibility and rights of those who do not fit into that traditional structure. And that's why Pride Month matters. Not because we need attention, because honey, we can get it without Pride Month. Not because we want to be different, but because historically and culturally, the playing field is not equal and has never been and may never be. Who knows? Pride is just about visibility, right? And resistance and community. It's about joy in the face of adversity. And the fact that it still makes people uncomfortable proves the point. If you are made uncomfortable by being told you're not an ally, you're not an ally, bitch. Now let's bring in a listener style question to wrap this segment up because I know people are thinking it. Somebody said somewhere at some point in time on my socials, why can't we just celebrate everyone without making it political? And I get that, okay? I guess this isn't really a listener question. This is probably a shitty comment in my comment section from somebody from fucking MAGA. Why can't we celebrate everyone without making it political? Like, I understand the desire for things to feel neutral and inclusive and harmonious, but the reality is this conversation is political because people's rights and identities and lives have been politicized. Pride did not start as a political statement because people wanted it to. It became one because it had to be. There was no other option. When your existence is debated and restricted or erased, simply being visible becomes an act of defiance in and of itself. So yes, we can celebrate families, right? All kinds of families. I'm so here for it. But we also need to be honest about the context in which those celebrations happen. Not all identities have been given the same space, the same recognition, or the same protection. And until they are, pride will continue no matter what. And I suppose nuclear family fucking month in June will also continue and continue to feel a little bit like a weird fucking choice. Part 2. The Charlie Kirk Act and the free speech plot twist that nobody asked for. Now, this one requires several deep breaths, like a sip of something strong and maybe a moment of silence for the concept of fucking irony. We're talking about what's being referred to as the Charlie Kirk Act, which is legislation tied to policies on college campuses that could lead to students being disciplined or even expelled for protesting certain speakers specifically labeled as controversial, which, let's be honest, often translates to anti-LGBTQ plus figures. And if you're not familiar, you've been under a rock, but if you're not, Charlie Kirk was the founder of Turning Point USA, which is a group that frequently organizes speaking events on college campuses featuring conservative commentators, many of whom have publicly expressed views that are very critical of the queer community and people of color, and gender affirming care and broader queer rights. They just pretty much hate it all, right? So here is the setup. Over the past few years, there has been a growing push, particularly in conservative-led states, for legislation that requires public colleges and universities to enforce stricter rules around free speech on campus. And on paper, yes, this sounds like a neutral or even positive thing. Protecting free speech, great, wonderful. Most of us can get behind it. Encouraging open dialogue, love that. No one reasonable out here is saying that people shouldn't be allowed to express their opinions. That's not the issue. The issue is how these policies are being applied and who they are actually protecting versus who they are disciplining. Because what these laws often do is create a framework where invited speakers, no matter how inflammatory or harmful their rhetoric may be, are given institutional protection, while students who protest those speakers can face disciplinary action if their protest is deemed disruptive. And disruptive is doing a lot of heavy lifting here, right? Because what counts as disruption? I don't know. Is it chanting? Is it holding signs? Is it organizing a walkout? Is it booing? Is it speaking out? Like historically, protest, like especially student protest, has always been disruptive. That's kind of the point in protesting, to disrupt something. You're not protesting to be quiet and fucking invisible. You're protesting to be seen and fucking heard. And according to reports from outlets like the Associated Press and the New York Times, several states have passed or proposed laws that require universities to impose penalties on students who interfere with speakers' abilities to present. Some of these policies include suspension or expulsion for repeat offenses. Repeat offenses, that's, important to acknowledge, maybe not a right away thing. And while these laws don't always explicitly name queer issues, the context in which they're being applied is pretty clear. Many of the high-profile incidents that have led to these policies involve protests against speakers who have expressed anti-queer views. So let's just call it what it is, okay? This is not happening in a vacuum. I love a vacuum. I actually need a new vacuum. This is happening in a broader cultural and political environment where LGBTQ plus rights are consistently debated, restricted, and in some cases, they're just being rolled the fuck back. And in that context, policies that limit protest, especially protest against anti-LGBTQ plus rhetoric and speech, start to look less like neutral free speech protections and more like targeted restrictions. My heart is racing. Oh God. Let's hydrate for a hot second. Damn, Charlie Kirk gets me worked the fuck up. And now, my friends, this is where the irony really kicks in, because the same groups that are advocating for these laws often frame themselves as champions of free speech. Like, no duh, no shit. They argue that conservative voices are being silenced on college campuses, that students are too sensitive, that there's a cancel culture problem. And then the solution they propose is to punish students for speaking out, to discipline them for expressing dissent, to potentially like expel them for protesting, like make it make sense. You're canceling cancel culture because you're canceling those that are trying to cancel. It just doesn't track, right? Like last time I checked, protest is speech, dissent is speech, disagreement is speech. And if your version of free speech only protects the speaker on stage, but not the students in the audience, that's not free speech. That's selective speech. And I would like to be very clear here. This is not about whether you agree or disagree with a particular speaker. This is not about whether someone's views are popular or unpopular or like what side of the aisle you sit on. This is about principle. If a university is supposed to be a place for open dialogue, that includes both the right to speak and the right to respond. And frankly, I don't think Charlie Kirk really gave people the right to respond. He always spoke back and at them. It was not a fucking conversation. Like, come on. And nor is it a conversation. It's actually less of a conversation now that Erica Kirk with her craziness is like running stuff. It's absolute insanity. Like if you're going to claim to, want to share more conservative values and have conversations, that's fine. But sit down and listen to other people, adapt and accept and come to some sort of agreement. Like I feel like Turning Point USA, they're just always like trying to prove their point as opposed to understanding other people's perspectives. Bringing it back, universities themselves are obviously in a very complicated position because they have to balance multiple things at once. They have to uphold the First Amendment. They have to ensure safety. They have to maintain order. They have to protect students' rights. And all that's not easy. But when legislation comes in and mandates specific penalties, it removes some of that flexibility. It forces institutions into a more rigid framework where the emphasis is on protecting the speaker at all costs. I mean, which totally makes sense after Charlie Kirk was assassinated. Like, even if that comes at the expense of students' expression, like, I get it. You don't want this to happen again. And I imagine that's just very stressful when any type of speaker now is coming to any university. Like, I would be terrified, frankly. But let's talk about the impact, because this is where it really matters. When students, especially marginalized students, see that protesting could lead to disciplinary action, it creates that chilling effect. It makes people think twice about speaking out. It makes them hesitate. It makes them self-censor. And that's not theoretical here. This is fucking true. That's been documented in discussions around campus speech policies. When the consequences are severe enough, people will choose silence over risk, especially students that are immigrants, especially students that are part of the minority group. Like, being an ally is one thing, but being a gay man and like going to event to protest is like this, putting yourself in a very vulnerable position. So for LGBTQ plus students, that silence can be very harmful. When a speaker comes to campus and expresses views that question your identity and your rights and like just straight up your existence, but your ability to respond is limited by the threat of punishment, that's not just a free speech issue, that's a safety and dignity issue. And I want to bring in a quote here that reflects how advocates have been framing this, okay? In interviews and public statements, civil liberties groups like the ACLU have emphasized that while protecting speech is important, policies must also protect the right to protest. So this is what they've noted in broader discussions. I begin, quote, "The First Amendment protects both the right to speak and the right to challenge speech through protest, so long as it does not prevent others from speaking entirely," end quote. That's the nuance that gets lost in a lot of these conversations. There is a difference between protest and suppression. There is a difference between disruption and silencing. And when those lines get blurred or intentionally redefined here, it creates a situation where one side's expression is prioritized over another. And as I like to do, let's zoom out for a second because this isn't just about one law or one state or one figure. This is about this broader trend that I talk about a lot. It's about how the concept of free speech is being used and reshaped and in some cases weaponized in cultural debates. And I know the word weaponized gets thrown around a lot, but in this context, it's really relevant. When policies are designed in a way that disproportionately affects certain groups, like students protesting anti queer rhetoric, it stops being neutral. That's just a fact, okay? And I want to come back to the bigger question here, which is what is the purpose of a university? Like, that's really the heart of this. Is it to be a marketplace of ideas? Is it to be a place where students are exposed to different perspectives? Like, yes, both of those, absolutely. But it's supposed to also be a place where students can engage with those ideas and they can challenge them and debate them and, yes, protest them, hopefully protest them if they don't agree with it. Like, that's how critical thinking develops. That's how movements happen. That's how change occurs. It's part of the life experience. And I want to bring this into a question that I found in a comment section on a post relating to this whole entire story. And I think a lot of people thought this, kind of agree with it, and made me start to think a little bit. So that question was, isn't this just about maintaining order on campus? Don't universities need rules to prevent chaos? And yeah, like the answer is yes. Like, of course they do. No one is advocating for complete disorder or unsafe environments. Like, we're not trying to Jan 6 fucking, I don't know, Southern California University or whatever. But there is a difference between maintaining order and suppressing people that are basically just standing up for the right to exist. There is a difference between ensuring safety and limiting people's expression. The question isn't whether there should be rules, it's how these rules are applied and who they affect. And when those rules disproportionately impact students who are speaking out against rhetoric that targets their own identities, we have to take a closer look because at the end of the day, free speech is not just about the right to speak. It's about the ecosystem of expression. It's about making sure that multiple voices can be heard, whether you agree with them or not just the ones with a microphone and a stage. And if and when we lose that balance, if and when we start creating environments where speaking out comes with disproportionate risk, we're not protecting free speech, we are narrowing it. And let's be really honest here. This will only affect people who are not straight and white and conservative. Okay? Because if they had an LGBTQ activist, if I was speaking at a university and there was a very religious group that was protesting, my seminar, they would be allowed to do that because free speech and because the right to practice your religion. However, if the tables were turned, if there was a very conservative religious speaker that was anti-queer and I was there protesting, because it doesn't have to do with religion, I would probably be arrested or expelled if I was a student. Like, the tables do not turn, right? Is that the right word? It's not an equal battle, right? Is what I'm saying. So when we start to silence free speech, which we should not be doing anyway, but it doesn't apply to everyone, that is where we have a problem. Part 3, trans women in men's prisons. This is not policy. This is danger. You're in danger, girl. Okay, straight up, this one is just freaking frustrating, okay? It's dangerous. This is not one of those topics where we can sit back and be like, oh, interesting policy discussion. Like, this has real, immediate human consequences. We are talking about the policy that is tied to Donald Trump, ordering or supporting the transfer of transgender women inmates into men's prisons. And if your immediate reaction is like, wait, that doesn't sound right, congratulations, your instincts are working because it's not right. And let's break this down very clearly, okay? factually, and we're going to layer in reality and what this actually means, because this is important to be very clear about. So, during the Trump administration, which is now, the Bureau of Prisons revised policies around housing transgender inmates. Previously, under Obama era guidance, placement decisions were supposed to consider an inmate's gender identity on a case by case basis, alongside safety concerns. It was not perfect, but there was at least an acknowledgement that gender identity matters when it comes to housing. But that has shifted because under Trump era policies, the emphasis moved towards housing inmates based on their biological sex at birth rather than their gender identity, with fewer protections and less flexibility. My first reaction is, why does this even matter to you? Obviously, it matters because it is a signal and a sign and just another attempt at rolling back queer, specifically trans rights. I'm like, aren't there bigger fish to fry? Like, you're at war, multiple wars right now. Like, why is this even a thing that we need to be focusing on? Now, according to reporting from organizations like the New York Times, this resulted in more transgender women being placed in men's facilities, even when it posed clear risks to their safety. And let's not sugarcoat this, okay? Those risks are not hypothetical. According to data from National Center for Transgender Equality and findings referenced by the U.S. Department of Justice, transgender inmates, particularly trans women housed in men's prisons, are significantly more likely to experience sexual assault and violence compared to the general prison population. Fucking no, duh. Imagine putting somebody who looks feminine and like a woman and a female, is transgender and is a woman and identifies as a woman, taking them from a women's prison and putting them in a group of men who have been hungry for a woman for a long time. You're basically, that in some cases might be a death sentence. And when we talk about the fact that they're significantly more likely to experience this assault, we're not talking about a small increase. We are talking about a dramatically higher rate of victimization. So when you take a population that is already vulnerable, already at higher risk, and you place them in an environment where that risk is amplified, that's not a neutral policy. That is exposure to harm. And that's putting it lightly. Now, the justification often given for these policies is about consistency or safety or clarity in placement decisions. Like, again, on the surface, sure, those words sound reasonable if you don't read a fucking article about it. But that's why I'm here, peeps, okay? Of course, prison systems need structure. Of course, they need guidelines. But here's the problem. When those guidelines ignore reality, they become dangerous. Because the reality is, a transgender woman is not the same as a cisgender man. Not physically, not socially, not in terms of how they are perceived and treated in a prison environment. And prisons are already one of the most dangerous, volatile environments you can be in. And in identity-based targeting, discrimination, and lack of protection, add in identity-based targeting, discrimination, and lack of protection, and you have a situation that is not just risky, again, life-threatening. And I need to emphasize something here because this part often gets lost in the political framing of this issue. We are still talking about human beings. We are talking about people, regardless of their crimes, regardless of their circumstances. I mean, not regardless of their crimes, because I think every pedophile should be castrated and then killed. They should have to live with their castration first and then be put on an island to live by themselves, and then we should kill them. That's just what I think about pedophiles. But when someone is in state custody, the government has a responsibility to ensure their safety. That's not optional. That's not political. That is a basic obligation. And when policies result in individuals being placed in environments where they are at a significantly higher risk of violence, that obligation is not being met, okay? And what I find so interesting about all of this is that it completely slips under the radar. Like, I think this is such an important part of the conversation because nobody's really talking about this, right? A lot of these policy changes don't come with big, dramatic announcements. They don't always lead the news cycle. This, I've only seen one Instagram post about it, nothing else anywhere. I could have missed it. I'm sure it's somewhere else, but I can't be everywhere. But they get implemented through administrative changes revisions to guidelines, shifts in interpretation, and unless you're actively paying attention, like I am, to prison policy, something most people don't do on a daily basis, like it's very easy to miss. It's easy for this to become one of those things that exists in the background, like affecting real people in very real ways without widespread public awareness, but it exists almost like not even anywhere you can really see it. And that is like a huge part of this issue. Like when something isn't visible, it's easier for it to continue. It just there's no way to stop it when we don't talk about it. And now I'm going to bring in another quote that reflects how advocates have responded to these policies because people are talking about it, it's just not being reported on. So, representatives from groups like Lambda Legal have emphasized that housing decisions must consider individual safety and identity. In broader discussions, advocates have stated that, and I quote, policies that ignore the lived realities of transgender individuals in custody put lives at risk, end quote. And that's the core of it, right? This is not about ideology. This is about lived reality. It's about what actually happens when you place someone in a specific environment. What happens to them? Can you imagine how terrified these trans women are being transferred to a male prison? Like, horrifying. And if the outcome of that placement is increased risk of assault, which it is, harassment, which it is, and harm, which it is, then the policy needs to be reevaluated. You're torturing someone. Like, make it make sense. Like, drives me crazy. But I also want to address something that often comes up in these conversations because I know it's out there. People are going to say, well, what about the safety of other inmates? Or how do you balance these concerns? Like, again, these can be valid questions. Like prison systems are very complex. I don't know the inner workings of them. There are multiple factors to consider. No one is saying there's like a one size fits all solution. That's for fucking sure. But what is being said is that a blanket policy, policies that ignore individual circumstances and default to rigid classifications are not the answer. Like at least with Obama era, there was some room for interpretation here, but safety is not achieved through oversimplification. Safety is achieved through thoughtful, case by case consideration, through acknowledging differences, not ignoring them, through actually looking at the data, the risks, and the lived experiences of the people involved. But we know that the Trump administration is not going to do that. We know that they're going to continue to roll back the rights of the queer community. We know that they are not going to take the time to address every trans inmate's situation. This is a part of that broader fucking pattern of policies that is affecting transgender individuals. Like, access to healthcare, roll it back, participation in public life, legal recognition, and treatment within the criminal justice system. Each of these policies on their own might seem like a separate issue if you're not looking close enough, but together they create this landscape where certain identities are consistently marginalized, restricted, or placed at a greater risk. And that is why this matters, because it's not just about one decision, it's about what that decision represents. And yet again, I'm going to bring in a little question or comment from the comment section because this is where people start to grapple with the reality of it. So one of the comments on the Instagram post about this story said, "Why should I care about prison policy if it doesn't affect me directly?" And frankly, I understand that question, right? I really do, because it's easy to distance yourself from issues that feel removed from your everyday life. Like if you're not a criminal, why do you care? But here's the thing, okay? How a society treats its most vulnerable population says everything about its values. Everything. If we are willing to accept policies that knowingly place certain individuals at higher risk of harm simply because of who they are, that sets a precedent. And that precedent doesn't stay contained, it expands. So, caring about this is not just about empathy, it is about accountability. It is about recognizing that systems of power have real consequences. And those consequences don't just disappear because they're happening out of sight. So, no, this is not just a policy discussion. This is a conversation about safety and ethics and responsibility. And if we're going to have that conversation, honestly, we have to start by acknowledging the reality of what these policies do, not what they say they do. not how they're framed, but what they actually result in. And in this case, that reality is very clear. And before we wrap it up, let me just say again, like, I'm talking about transgender inmates that, might have been arrested for drug charges or like grand theft auto. I don't know, steal a car, honey. I'm not talking about people who have like are serial killers, who have raped women, who are pedophiles. Like, I'm them, honestly, like, leave them in a hole, okay? When you've done something so unforgivable, you can't be rehabilitated. You touch a child, like, leave you in a motherfucking hole, okay? I am talking about, your everyday transgender person who has been marginalized, who might be a person of color that has struggled to find their way in life, that had to resort to something to like just fucking survive, was arrested, was put in prison. Like, I mean, there's so much gray area here. So I just want to be really clear that I'm not talking about the worst of the worst. So we started this episode with the Nuclear Family Month in Tennessee, and we broke down why that matters and why Pride Month exists and why straight identity does not need more visibility. And then we talked about the Charlie Kirk Act and what's happening on college campuses and how policies that claim to protect free speech can actually limit it, and how people that hate cancel culture are now the ones perpetuating cancel culture. Go Republicans. And then we talked about the policies tied to Donald Trump regarding transgender women being transferred to male prisons, which is mind-blowing and terrifying. And I definitely think this is something we should all be worried about and looking into. If you give a flying fuck about the LGBTQ plus community, that is an important story that you should all be standing up for and standing against. And if there's one thing I want you to take away from all of this, it's this: context matters. These stories are not isolated. They are part of a bigger growing pattern, a bigger growing conversation about identity and rights and who gets to feel safe, seen, and supported in this society. So don't just read a headline. Don't just scroll past it. Pay a fucking attention. Ask some questions. Stay informed, because these things affect real people, whether you see it directly or not. And if this episode resonated with you, if it gave you something to think about, share it. Send it to someone, start a conversation, because that's how awareness actually spreads, by sharing and growing and opening up the conversation. And that's also how the podcast spreads, by sharing the conversation. Make sure you're following me on Instagram and TikTok at _hotairpod, and head to hotairwithjoshuarobert.com to shop my merch. If you're watching on Instagram, like my cute mug that I am consistently drinking out of. I'm sure you're also fucking tired of me saying, go buy a cute mug. I should get my tumbler. I haven't got my tumbler yet, but there's also a hot air tumbler and hoodies. And I think there's tanks now and t-shirts. I mean, they're adorable, right? But you can also submit your listener letters and topic suggestions for future episodes. So stay informed, stay in the know, try not to go too crazy when you stay informed, and stay in the know. And I will see you next Tuesday.